The Galactic Council chamber was, to put it mildly, a monument to architectural overcompensation. Crystalline spires twisted toward a ceiling that disappeared into manufactured starlight, while holographic displays danced around floating platforms that somehow managed to look both ancient and impossibly advanced. It was the kind of place designed to make visitors feel small, insignificant, and preferably a little dizzy from craning their necks upward. Today's agenda item: the human problem. Commander Cat Wolf sat in the designated Primitive Species section, a charming little alcove that the Council had thoughtfully positioned near the waste recycling indicators. She'd arrived early, claimed a seat with a decent view, and spent the last 20 minutes watching various alien dignitaries file in while making notes on her tablet. Occasionally, she'd glance up and smile at whoever happened to be looking her way. It was not, several observers noted with growing unease, a particularly reassuring smile. Overlord Thixon was holding court near the center of the chamber, his chitinous form gleaming under the artificial suns as he gestured with all four of his primary appendages. The Insectoid Coalition had been one of the founding members of the Federation, and Thixon never let anyone forget it. His compound eyes glittered with what passed for amusement among his species as he addressed a small gathering of allied delegates. "The audacity of it," he was saying, his voice carrying the particular resonance that made lesser species' teeth ache. "They request full membership status. Full membership, as if their crude chemical rockets and metal projectile weapons constitute anything resembling civilization." High Scholar Velmorith, a being whose crystalline form could have been mistaken for a particularly expensive chandelier, hummed in harmonics that translated roughly to pompous agreement. "Their mathematical understanding remains elementary at best. I've reviewed their computational methods. They still rely on binary systems and silicon-based processors. How delightfully rustic." Now, Ambassador Kroon interjected, his amphibious features rippling with what might have been diplomatic concern. "Perhaps we shouldn't be quite so dismissive. The humans have shown remarkable adaptability in their short time since achieving interstellar travel." Thixon's mandibles clicked, in what definitely wasn't laughter, but served the same social function. "Adaptability? You mean their tendency to solve every problem with increasingly larger explosions?" "Yes, quite adaptive." Cat continued taking notes. The formal session began with the traditional recitation of Federation principles, delivered in 17 different languages by a floating sphere that had probably seen better millennia. Cat used the time to study the layout of the chamber, count exit points, and estimate the blast radius that would be needed to— well, that was probably not the sort of thinking appropriate for a diplomatic gathering. Probably. When the sphere finally wound down, the current Council Prime, a gaseous entity calling itself Luxon the Beneficent, began the day's proceedings. "Honored members, we gather to address the petition of the human species for full Federation membership. As is traditional, we shall hear concerns from member species before rendering our decision." Thixon was on his feet. Well, his ambulatory appendages, before the Prime had finished speaking. "Honored Prime, the Insectoid Coalition must express our grave concerns regarding this premature elevation of a clearly unprepared species." "Do elaborate, Overlord," the Prime replied, managing to sound both bored and condescending in the same ethereal whisper. "Where does one begin?" Thixon spread his arms in a gesture that encompassed the entire chamber. "Their military doctrine, if one can dignify it with such a term, consists entirely of what they euphemistically call asymmetric warfare. This translates in practice to striking from concealment, targeting civilian infrastructure, and employing weapons of mass destruction against opponents who vastly outnumber them. Several species nodded their various head analogues in agreement. Furthermore, he continued, warming to his theme, their diplomatic protocols are virtually non-existent. They arrive at negotiations armed, refuse to participate in traditional honor-bonding ceremonies, and have the temerity to suggest that agreements should be, what was the phrase, put in writing, rather than sealed through proper psychic melding. High Scholar Velmorith resonated at a frequency that suggested intellectual superiority mixed with barely contained disgust. If I may add to the Overlord's observations, their scientific methodology is equally primitive. They insist on what they call peer review and reproducible results. They seem incapable of accepting theoretical frameworks without this obsessive need to test everything in what they call controlled conditions. A ripple of educated disdain swept through the chamber. Most telling, Velmorith continued, is their approach to conflict resolution. Rather than seeking harmony through superior understanding or technological deterrence, they engage in what can only be described as organized barbarism. They actually train their military personnel to operate independently, without constant oversight from higher intelligence. The chaos this must create is simply unimaginable. Ambassador Kroon's gill slits fluttered nervously. Perhaps we should consider that their methods, while unorthodox, have proven effective? The trade routes they've been assigned to patrol have seen a marked decrease in piracy incidents. Effective? Vixen's voice cracked like breaking stone. Ambassador, they reduced the stellar corsairs from a fleet of 800 vessels to a handful of survivors in less than 3 local rotations. That's not patrol work. That's genocide. Well, Kroon replied quietly, the corsairs haven't been bothering merchant vessels lately. That's not the point. Vixen's chitinous plates rattled with agitation. A civilized species would have captured them, rehabilitated them, taught them to find productive places in galactic society. These humans simply eliminated them, with extreme prejudice, as they so charmingly put it. Kat looked up from her tablet and smiled. Several nearby delegates suddenly found their breathing apparatus required immediate adjustment. The debate continued for another hour, with species after species rising to voice their concerns about human aggression, human unpredictability, and human refusal to follow established protocols. The ethereal collective worried about human resistance to psychic influence. The machine consciousness found human creativity statistically improbable and therefore disturbing. The hive worlds complained that humans couldn't be properly integrated into groupthink networks. Through it all, Kat took notes, occasionally nodding as if she were taking down cooking tips rather than listening to a systematic deconstruction of her species' character. Finally, Luxon the Beneficent turned toward the human section. Commander Wolf, you have been remarkably restrained during these proceedings. Perhaps you would care to offer a response to the concerns raised? Kat stood, tablet in hand, and walked to the center of the speaking area. She was, the assembled delegates noted, completely unarmed by any visible standard. No energy weapons, no projectile devices, no enhancement suits, no psychic amplifiers. Just a human in a simple uniform carrying what appeared to be a basic computational device. "Thank you, Honored Prime," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without any apparent technological assistance. "I've been taking notes, actually. It's been quite educational." She glanced down at her tablet, scrolled through something, then looked back up with that same unsettling smile. I have to admit, some of these observations are, well, they're not wrong, exactly. We do tend to approach problems differently than most species. We do have some unusual ideas about conflict resolution. And yes, we do prefer to put agreements in writing. Call it a quirky cultural trait. Dixon leaned forward. Then you acknowledge your species' unsuitability for Federation membership? Oh, I wouldn't say that, Kat replied. I'd say there might be some misunderstandings about human capabilities. Some gaps in the available data. She tapped her tablet again. For instance, Overlord Thixon mentioned the stellar corsairs. That's actually an interesting case study. Would you like to know what really happened there? The chamber fell silent. The corsairs had been operating for 18 standard cycles, preying primarily on unarmed merchant vessels from developing civilizations. Their preferred targets were medical, supply ships, and refugee transports. They'd killed approximately 2 million sentient beings and displaced another 15 million. Her voice remained conversational, almost cheerful. Federation enforcement had made limited progress against them. Something about their tactics being unconventional and their leadership structure being impossible to predict. The prevailing wisdom was that it would take a coordinated effort by at least 3 major battle fleets to dislodge them from their base in the Kepler Nebula. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. We used 1 frigate and a crew of 32. The silence stretched. Oh, and a very carefully worded ultimatum. Though I suppose that doesn't count as technological superiority. High Scholar Velmorith's crystalline structure resonated at a frequency suggesting deep confusion. How is such a thing possible? Our tactical analysis indicated. Your tactical analysis, Kat interrupted gently, was based on conventional approaches to the problem. Blockades, siege warfare, attrition through superior firepower. All very civilized. She smiled again. We asked them nicely to surrender. When they declined, we demonstrated what happens when you spend 18 cycles terrorizing refugee ships instead of, getting a proper job. The reports indicated massive casualties, Thixon said slowly. Your forces showed no mercy. Oh, we showed plenty of mercy, Kat replied. We gave them multiple opportunities to surrender. We targeted only military assets. We even provided medical aid to survivors and arranged for their repatriation to species of origin. She paused. Of course, after 18 cycles of murdering civilians, most of the Corsair leadership had developed what our psychologists call acute allergic reactions to accountability. They kept trying to fight rather than face war crimes tribunals. Tragic, really. Ambassador Kroon's gills fluttered rapidly. Commander, perhaps you could clarify exactly how a single frigate managed to defeat a fleet of 800 vessels? Kat's smile widened. Now, that's an interesting question, Ambassador. Are you sure you want me to answer that? Because the answer involves a fairly detailed discussion of human military doctrine, tactical flexibility, and our approach to problem-solving under adverse conditions. She looked around the chamber. I could provide a complete after-action report, if anyone's interested. It includes some fascinating case studies in unconventional warfare, resource allocation, and what we call target-rich environments. The chamber remained silent. The thing is, Kat continued, I suspect some of you might find the details unsettling. Humans have this habit of approaching problems from angles that other species consider impossible, impractical, or just plain rude. Overlord Thixun's compound eyes glittered. Are you suggesting that your species possesses military capabilities Beyond what you've revealed to this council? Kat looked down at her tablet, scrolled through several screens, then looked back up. Overlord, what I'm suggesting is that there might be some significant gaps in the available data regarding human capabilities, human operations, and human involvement in maintaining galactic stability. She paused, letting that sink in. Would anyone like me to fill in some of those gaps? Because I have to warn you, the briefing materials are fairly comprehensive. We're looking at several hours of presentation time, and some of the case studies are, well, they're probably going to change how you think about a few things. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the chamber's environmental systems. For instance, Kat said casually, there's that situation we handled in the Kepler system last year. Remember that little incident, Overlord Thixon? The one where 3 different species were about to turn a disputed mining claim into a sector-wide war. Thixon's chitinous plates began to rattle again. I have a very detailed report on how that got resolved. Very detailed, complete with recommendations for preventing similar situations in the future. She looked around the chamber one more time. So, would anyone like to see the after-action report? The silence in the Galactic Council chamber had reached that particular quality, usually reserved for funeral services and tax audits. Commander Kat Wolf stood in the center of the speaking area, tablet in hand, wearing an expression of helpful innocence that was somehow more terrifying than any weapon. Overlord Thixon's compound eyes swept the chamber, noting the uncomfortable shifting among his fellow delegates. The human's casual mention of the Kepler incident had touched a nerve, several nerves, actually, distributed across multiple species who'd been very carefully not talking about certain recent events. Commander, Thixon said finally, his voice carrying the particular authority that came from ruling 12 hive worlds and commanding respect through sheer biomass, if nothing else. Your implications are intriguing. However, words are cheap. Claims of military prowess are easily made in the safety of a diplomatic chamber. Kat tilted her head slightly, like a bird considering a particularly interesting insect. Are you suggesting I'm exaggerating, Overlord? I'm suggesting, Thixon replied, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction, that your species has a well-documented tendency toward creative storytelling. Perhaps it would be more productive to demonstrate these alleged capabilities rather than simply talking about them. Several delegates perked up at this. Nothing livened up a council session like watching someone else walk into a diplomatic trap. A demonstration? Kat asked. That's an interesting suggestion. What did you have in mind? High Scholar Velmorith resonated at a frequency that translated roughly to smugness mixed with anticipation. Perhaps a simple military exercise? Nothing too complex. We wouldn't want to overwhelm your primitive methodologies. Oh, that sounds fun, Kat said, making a note on her tablet. What sort of exercise? Ambassador Kroon's gill slits fluttered nervously. Now, wait just a moment. Perhaps we should consider a rescue operation, Thixon interrupted, clearly having given this some thought. Multi-species participation. Equal conditions for all participants. Winner determined by objective measures of success. Rescue operation, Kat repeated, stylus poised over her tablet. Hostage situation. Precisely. A simulated scenario, naturally. We'll establish appropriate testing parameters on one of the Federation training worlds. Kat nodded thoughtfully. And the other participants would be the finest military units from the most advanced civilizations in the Federation, Velmorith chimed in, to provide context for your performance. Context. Right. Kat made another note. So, we're talking about competitive evaluation of tactical doctrine, resource management, and mission completion rates? Exactly, Thixon said. Though, of course, we'll need to ensure fair play. Can't have any unusual advantages. Kat looked up from her tablet with that smile again. Define unusual? Well, Thixon's plates rattled with what passed for laughter among his species. We certainly can't have humans bringing their primitive chemical explosives and metal projectiles against opponents equipped with proper energy weapons and defensive systems. Ah, Kat said. So you want to level the playing field by removing restrictions on human equipment? The chamber fell silent as the implications of that statement settled in. I mean, Kat continued cheerfully, if we're going for fair competition, we should probably all use our standard operational gear, right? No artificial limitations? Thixon's compound eyes refocused several times in rapid succession. Standard operational gear? You know, the stuff we actually use when lives are on the line. Not the ceremonial hardware we bring to diplomatic functions. She glanced around the chamber. I have to warn you, though, our standard loadout might seem a bit excessive by Federation standards. We tend to prepare for worst-case scenarios. High Scholar Velmorith's crystalline structure began emitting a low harmonic that suggested deep unease. Perhaps we should establish some reasonable parameters. Oh, no need, Kat interrupted. I'm sure whatever restrictions you think are appropriate will be fine. We're quite adaptable. She made a few more notes on her tablet. Now, about the rescue scenario. How many hostages are we talking about? What's the threat profile? Environmental hazards? Time constraints? Rules of engagement regarding collateral damage? Why do you need to know about collateral damage? Ambassador Kroon asked nervously. Well, Kat said, it affects tactical options. For instance, if we're operating in an urban environment with civilian populations, that limits our choice of, well, let's call them area denial weapons. But if it's an isolated facility with no innocents in the blast radius, that opens up considerably more creative approaches. Blast radius? Thixon's voice cracked slightly. Figure of speech, Kat said with a wave of her hand. We'll work within whatever parameters you set. Though I should mention, our team will need about 48 hours to prep. 48 hours? Velmorith resonated at a frequency suggesting confusion. For equipment checks and personnel briefing? Equipment checks, personnel briefing, target analysis, contingency planning, ordnance selection, and what we call making a few phone calls. Kat looked thoughtful. Actually, better make it 60 hours. I want to bring in some specialists for this one. Specialists? Kroon's gills were fluttering so rapidly they were creating a small whirlpool in his breathing apparatus. Well, if we're doing a proper demonstration, we should probably do it right. I'm thinking we'll want at least one demolitions expert, someone who's good with long-range precision work, a medic who can handle multiple species physiology, and a communications specialist who can coordinate with your various command structures. She paused. Oh, and I'll need complete technical specifications for all participating species equipment, physiological limitations, and operational doctrines. For safety purposes, you understand. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings during the exercise. The silence stretched until Overlord Thixon found his voice again. You seem remarkably prepared for this sort of challenge. Well, Kat said, we do try to stay current on training opportunities. It's been a while since we've had a chance to demonstrate human capabilities in a controlled environment. How long is a while? Ambassador Kroon asked, though he looked like he immediately regretted the question. Kat consulted her tablet. Let's see. The last major multi-species training exercise we participated in was— Oh, that's right. We haven't participated in any major multi-species training exercises. She looked up with that smile again. This will be our first. How exciting. High Scholar Velmorith's harmonic resonance had shifted to something that registered as barely controlled panic on most translation systems. Perhaps we should reconsider the parameters of this demonstration. Oh, no need, Kat interrupted. I'm sure it'll be educational for everyone involved. She made a few more notes. Now, about the venue. I assume we'll want somewhere with appropriate medical facilities, and maybe some sort of containment protocols, just in case things get a little enthusiastic. Containment protocols? Dixon's mandibles were clicking rapidly now. Standard safety measures, Kat assured him. Though I should mention, our insurance carrier requires that we inform all participants about certain statistical probabilities regarding human military exercises. What sort of statistical probabilities? Kat scrolled through her tablet. Let's see. Increased likelihood of property damage, elevated probability of mission parameters exceeding initial scope, significant chance that post-exercise cleanup will require specialized equipment. She looked up brightly. Oh, and there's a small but non-zero probability that the exercise will conclude ahead of schedule, due to what our after-action reports usually classify as unforeseen tactical innovations. Ambassador Kroon made a sound that might have been sobbing in his species' emotional vocabulary. Commander, perhaps we could arrange for something less intensive? Intensive? Kat looked genuinely puzzled. This is just a basic rescue scenario. Wait until you see what we do for our advanced training exercises. She turned back to Thixun. So, Overlord, shall we say the Corvani Training Complex? I hear it has excellent isolation protocols and really first-rate emergency response capabilities. Thixun's compound eyes focused and refocused as he processed the implications of that statement. Why would we need emergency response capabilities for a training exercise? Oh, you probably won't, Kat said cheerfully. But our risk management people are very thorough. They like to plan for contingencies. What sort of contingencies? Kat consulted her tablet again. Well, there's always the possibility that someone might mistake the exercise for an actual combat situation and respond with disproportionate enthusiasm, or that environmental factors might create unexpected tactical opportunities, or that someone might accidentally exceed the recommended safe distances for certain types of demonstration equipment. She looked around the chamber. But I'm sure everything will go smoothly. After all, it's just a simple rescue mission. The way she said simple made several delegates reach for their emergency communication devices. Now then, Kat continued, I'll need contact information for all participating units so we can coordinate timing and safety protocols. And I'll want a complete environmental assessment of the training area, geological surveys, atmospheric composition, local wildlife, that sort of thing. Why do you need to know about local wildlife? Velmorith asked weakly. Well, we wouldn't want any interference during the exercise. Though I have to say, it's been a while since our people have had a chance to operate in an environment with indigenous fauna. Could make things more interesting. She made another note. Oh, and I'll need confirmation that all participating species have appropriate insurance coverage for their personnel and equipment. Our legal department is very particular about liability issues. Overlord Thixun was beginning to suspect he'd made a terrible mistake. Commander, exactly what sort of demonstration equipment are you planning to bring to this exercise? Kat smiled that smile again. Standard human military equipment, Overlord. Nothing fancy. Just the sort of gear we'd normally use for a straightforward rescue operation in hostile territory with unknown opposition and time constraints. She paused. I should probably mention, though, our definition of standard equipment has expanded somewhat since we joined the galactic community. We've had to adapt to the increased scale of operations. Increased scale? Well, when your area of operations covers multiple star systems and you're dealing with threats that have access to planet-killer weapons and FTL capability, you tend to upgrade your toolkit accordingly. The chamber had gone so quiet that the hum of environmental systems sounded like industrial machinery. But don't worry, Kat added helpfully. We'll make sure to use the appropriate level of force for a training exercise. Probably won't need anything more energetic than, let's say, Class 5 demolitions and standard kinetic penetrators. Class 5? Dixon's voice was barely a whisper. It's really not that impressive, Kat assured him. We save the interesting stuff for actual combat situations. She looked around the chamber one more time. So, shall we schedule this demonstration? I'm quite looking forward to it. It's been ages since we've had a chance to show off. The Corvani training complex had been designed to simulate the worst possible conditions for military operations. Volcanic terrain, unpredictable weather patterns, and enough environmental hazards to keep safety inspectors awake at night. It was, in the opinion of most Federation military strategists, the perfect place to separate competent forces from pretenders. Which was why the current situation was so profoundly disturbing. Overlord Thixon stood in the observation bunker, his compound eyes tracking multiple display screens that showed the various rescue zones. 3 days ago, this had seemed like such a simple way to humiliate the humans and put them in their proper place. Now, watching the mission unfold, he was beginning to suspect that the universe had a cruel sense of humor. "Status report," he commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. High Scholar Velmorith's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated deep confusion mixed with what could only be described as intellectual panic. The Zephyrian aerial units have successfully identified their target structure, but are reporting difficulty with the thermal updrafts from the volcanic vents. Estimated time to mission completion: 8 hours, assuming weather conditions improve. And the Ethereal Collective? Still attempting to establish psychic contact with their assigned hostages. The volcanic interference is problematic for their telepathic coordination systems. Current estimate? 12 hours, possibly longer. Thixon's mandibles clicked in what wasn't quite satisfaction. His own forces were making steady progress through their assigned sector, despite the challenging terrain. What about our Hive warriors? Proceeding according to doctrine, they've established a perimeter around the target facility and are conducting systematic reconnaissance. Estimated completion time: 6 hours. Excellent. And the humans? Velmorith's harmonic resonance shifted to something that registered as confusion on most translation systems. That's complicated. How complicated? They completed their mission 38 minutes ago. The observation bunker fell silent, except for the hum of monitoring equipment and Thixon's increasingly rapid mandible clicking. Completed, he said finally. Their hostages were in the most difficult sector, surrounded by active lava flows and unstable terrain. How is completion possible? Well, Velmorith said carefully, they didn't exactly follow standard rescue protocols. On the main display screen, grainy footage began playing from the human operational zone. The volcanic wasteland looked like something from a particularly unpleasant afterlife, with rivers of molten rock, toxic gas vents, and jagged obsidian formations that could slice through most known materials. 4 figures in matte black armor moved across this hellscape like they were taking a casual stroll through a park. The human team consisted of demolitions specialist Tommy "Boom" Cooper, sniper Yuki Tanaka, field medic Carlos Rivera, and communications specialist Tech Sergeant Emma Okafor. Velmorith reported in the tone usually reserved for delivering terminal diagnoses. Led by Commander Wolf. 5 personnel for a mission our tacticians estimated would require at least 30, Dixon observed. Yes, that should have been their first indication of irregularity. The footage showed the human team approaching a facility built into the side of an active volcano. The structure was surrounded by automated defense systems, sensor networks, and enough hostile terrain to stop a small army. Initial approach was unconventional, Velmorith continued. On screen, Cooper was placing what looked like small packages around the perimeter of the defensive grid. The packages were tiny, almost insignificant-looking. "Are those explosives?" Ambassador Kroon asked from his position near the environmental controls, where he'd been nervously adjusting atmospheric settings for the last hour. According to the mission briefing, they're localized kinetic redistributors, Velmorith replied. Apparently, humans have several dozen different terms for devices that make things explode. The small packages detonated in a precisely timed sequence. The massive defensive turrets didn't just shut down. They disintegrated into component atoms. Impressive precision, Dixon admitted grudgingly. Though wasteful, a more elegant solution would have been to disable the systems electronically. That's what Tanaka was for, Velmorith said. The footage switched to an overhead view, showing the sniper positioned on a ridge nearly 2 kilometers away. While Cooper had been handling the obvious defenses, Tanaka had been systematically eliminating backup systems, communication relays, and what appeared to be several hidden observation posts. Her weapon, Velmorith noted, is firing projectiles at velocities that shouldn't be possible with kinetic systems. Our analysts are confused. Confused how? The projectiles appear to be self-guiding and are somehow penetrating energy shields that should stop anything short of ship-mounted weapons. On screen, Tanaka fired a single shot that somehow managed to curve around 3 separate obstacles before striking a target that hadn't even been visible from her position. "That's not possible," Dixon said flatly. "No," Velmorith agreed. "It's not." The footage continued. With the defenses neutralized, the human team approached the main facility. Instead of conducting a careful reconnaissance or establishing a siege perimeter, they simply walked up to the main entrance. At this point, Velmorith said, their communications specialist made contact with the hostage-takers. Standard negotiation protocols? Not exactly. The audio feed crackled to life, and Tech Sergeant Okafor's voice filled the observation bunker. Her tone was conversational, almost friendly. "This is the Terran Federation Diplomatic Corps. We're here about the hostage situation. We'd like to offer you a choice." A harsh alien voice responded in what the translation systems identified as Korthak battle cant. "Federation scum! We have 40 prisoners and enough firepower to level this entire mountain. Withdraw, or we start executing hostages." "Oh, that's unfortunate," Okafor replied, "because we were really hoping to do this the easy way. But since you brought up executions, I should probably mention that my colleague Cooper has spent the last 15 minutes turning your facility into what he calls a physics demonstration waiting to happen." "You're bluffing!" "Cooper, you want to show them that thing you did with the support columns?" There was a distant rumble, and several sections of the facility's outer wall simply ceased to exist. "That was just the appetizer," Okafor continued cheerfully. Would you like to see the main course? Because Rivera has been getting bored. And when our medic gets bored, he starts thinking up creative ways to use his field surgery equipment. A new voice came over the communications channel, speaking in fluent Korthak, with what could only be described as ominous enthusiasm. I have a laser scalpel rated for deep tissue work and approximately 8 minutes before I need to report mission completion to command. I'm sure we can find some way to make this interesting. Your medic speaks Korthak? Thixon asked weakly. Apparently, Rivera speaks 18 languages and has what they call extensive field experience in hostile negotiations, Velmoreth replied. His psychological profile includes a note about creative problem-solving under pressure. The hostage-takers on the recording were beginning to sound less confident. What do you want? Simple, Okafor said. Release the hostages, surrender your weapons, and we'll arrange for safe transport to appropriate judicial facilities. Everyone goes home. Well, some of you go to prison, but you go there alive, and with all your original appendages. And if we refuse? There was a pause, and when Okafor spoke again, her tone hadn't changed at all. Then Cooper demonstrates why his friends call him Boom. Tanaka shows off her collection of impossible shots, and Rivera gets to practice field surgery on unwilling subjects. Oh, and I get to file a report explaining why we had to scrape you off the walls. You're threatening us. No, Okafor replied patiently. I'm offering you the opportunity to survive the next 10 minutes. The threats come later, in court, from qualified legal personnel. The surrender had taken less than 3 minutes. And the hostage extraction? Thixon asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know. Rivera established triage protocols for 43 individuals from 6 different species, including 2 cases of severe trauma and 1 near-fatal allergic reaction to volcanic atmospheric conditions, Velmoreth reported. All hostages were stabilized and evacuated within 18 minutes. 18 minutes? For 43 individuals with various medical complications? Rivera apparently has what humans call experience with mass casualty situations. His medical kit included treatment protocols for every known Federation species, plus several we haven't encountered yet. The footage showed the human medic moving through the liberated hostages with practiced efficiency, dispensing medications, applying emergency treatments, and somehow managing to communicate with each individual in their native language. But here's where it gets interesting, Velmoreth continued. Once they'd completed their primary mission, they contacted the other teams. Contacted them how? To offer assistance. New footage appeared on the screens, showing the human team approaching the Zephyrian operational zone. The aerial specialists were still struggling with the thermal updrafts, their elegant flight forms being battered by unpredictable volcanic winds. Tanaka solved their atmospheric navigation problem by eliminating the source of the thermal interference, Velmoreth reported. Apparently, 3 precisely placed shots could redirect the volcanic gas flow to create stable air currents. She shot a volcano? She shot a volcano and improved the local weather. The Ethereal Collective had received similar assistance. Their psychic networks, disrupted by volcanic interference, were restored when Cooper deployed what he cheerfully described as psychic signal boosters, devices that somehow created stable telepathic communication channels through active volcanic terrain. We're still trying to understand how kinetic devices can enhance psychic phenomena, Velmoreth admitted. And our forces? Were offered tactical support in the form of what Commander Wolf called terrain optimization. Velmorith's harmonic pattern shifted to something resembling traumatic stress. She asked if they'd like her to smooth out some of the rough spots in their operational area. Smooth out rough spots? She was referring to the mountain range between our forces and their objective. Cooper could apparently adjust the local topography to provide more direct access routes. Dixon's compound eyes focused and refocused rapidly. They offered to move mountains? As a courtesy, to speed up the exercise. The observation bunker fell silent again, except for the sound of Ambassador Croon's increasingly rapid gill flutter and what might have been Velmorith's crystalline structure developing stress fractures. Mission completion time for all teams, with human assistance, 42 minutes, Velmorith reported quietly. Mission completion time for human team, working alone, 38 minutes. Meaning they finished their mission, then helped everyone else finish theirs? While maintaining what they described as appropriate safety margins and standard operational protocols, Dixon stared at the screens, watching the human team efficiently coordinating the evacuation of all rescued hostages, the processing of surrendered hostage-takers, and what appeared to be a comprehensive environmental cleanup operation. This was their standard operational procedure, he asked finally. According to Commander Wolf, this was a relatively straightforward extraction with minimal complications. Minimal complications? She mentioned that they'd been worried about the volcanic activity creating interesting tactical challenges, but apparently the environment was reasonably stable for their purposes. On the main screen, Commander Wolf appeared, looking exactly as calm and professional as she had in the council chamber. She was standing next to what had once been an impregnable fortress and was now a carefully organized evacuation site. Observer Control, this is Human Team Leader. Her voice came through the communication system. Mission complete. All objectives achieved. All personnel accounted for. Ready for debrief at your convenience. She paused. Oh, and we've prepared a comprehensive after-action report covering tactical innovations, resource utilization, and recommendations for improved interspecies operational coordination. Should be educational. Dixon closed his compound eyes and tried to pretend this was all a very elaborate nightmare. How long? He asked quietly. Until the debrief? Commander Wolf suggests we convene in 1 hour, Velmorith replied. She says she needs time to organize the presentation materials. Presentation materials? Apparently, humans document everything. The Galactic Council chamber had never been this quiet. Even the environmental systems seemed to be holding their breath, as Commander Cat Wolf stood at the central podium, tablet in hand, wearing that same helpful smile that had become the stuff of diplomatic nightmares. Thank you all for attending this debrief, she said cheerfully. I know everyone's eager to discuss the exercise results. Overlord Dixon sat in what could generously be called stunned silence. High Scholar Velmoreth's crystalline structure was emitting a low harmonic that translated roughly to existential dread. Ambassador Croon had given up on maintaining proper gill flutter rhythm entirely. Now then, Cat continued, I promised you an after-action report, and humans always keep their promises. She tapped her tablet, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. Let's start with some basic statistics. Human military operations over the past 5 standard cycles. 832 successful missions across 41 star systems, with a mission success rate of 99.6%. The displays showed star charts, operational zones, and casualty figures that made several delegates reach for emergency medications. But here's the interesting part, Kat said. None of you knew about any of these operations. Thixun's mandibles clicked weakly. Impossible. Intelligence networks would have detected. Would they? Kat interrupted gently. Because, according to our records, we prevented 3 different sector-wide wars, eliminated 18 separate piracy organizations, and resolved 41 impossible diplomatic crises, all while maintaining what we call operational discretion. New displays appeared showing incident reports, casualty prevention statistics, and economic impact assessments. The Kepler incident, for instance. 3 different species were positioning battle fleets for what our analysts estimated would result in approximately 12 million military casualties and 40 million civilian deaths. We resolved it with 1 frigate and a strongly worded conversation. She smiled at Thixon specifically. Your people were planning to commit 60% of your military forces to that conflict, Overlord. We saved you from a war that would have bankrupted your civilization. The chamber remained silent as the implications settled in. See, the thing is, Kat continued, we didn't want to join the Federation for protection. We wanted to join so we could protect everyone else more efficiently. She gestured to the holographic displays. Every primitive human patrol route you've assigned us? We've been using them to maintain galactic stability. Every barbaric military action you've criticized? We've been preventing catastrophes you never knew were coming. Ambassador Kroon found his voice. Why? Why didn't you tell us? Because you wouldn't have believed us, Kat replied simply. You were too busy being superior to notice that we've been keeping the lights on. She tapped her tablet one final time. Oh, and about that situation in the Andromeda contact zone I mentioned earlier? That's where we're establishing first contact protocols with a potentially hostile extragalactic civilization that makes the old Corsair fleets look like a minor customs violation. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several delegates quietly activating emergency communication systems. So, Kat said brightly, shall we discuss that full Federation membership now? Because I have another briefing in 20 minutes about something we're calling the big picture. And trust me, you're going to want humans on your side for that conversation. She looked around the chamber one last time. After all, someone needs to keep you safe while you're busy being civilized. The vote was unanimous, not because every species suddenly loved humans, but because nobody wanted to be the one delegate who voted against the people who'd been single-handedly preventing galactic civilization from collapsing into chaos. Commander Kat Wolf accepted the ceremonial Federation membership charter with the same helpful smile that had terrorized the council chamber for the past week. Thank you. We're honored to be officially welcomed into the family. She paused, glancing at her tablet. Though I should mention, our integration timeline might need some adjustments. Turns out, we've been accidentally operating as de facto Federation military command for the past 18 months. Legal says we need to sort out the paperwork. Overlord Thixon, who had spent the last hour reconsidering every decision he'd made since reaching sentience, managed to find his voice. Commander, about our earlier misunderstandings. Oh, don't worry about it, Kat replied cheerfully. Happens all the time. Most species go through a phase of thinking they're the apex predators in their local region. Usually takes a few years to adjust perspectives. She consulted her tablet again. Speaking of adjustments, we'll need to brief everyone on the new threat assessment protocols. The Andromeda situation is developing faster than anticipated, and we're going to need all available resources coordinated through proper command structures. High Scholar Velmorith's crystalline structure flickered nervously. When you say all available resources, I mean everything, Kat said simply. Every ship, every weapon system, every tactical innovation your species have developed. Because what's coming through the galactic barrier makes our little Corsair problem look like a neighborhood dispute. She looked around the chamber, and for the first time, her smile carried something that might have been sympathy. But here's the thing about humans. We don't give up, we don't back down, and we really, really don't like bullies. Whether they're pirates threatening refugee ships or extragalactic nightmares trying to turn our galaxy into a parking lot. The massive holographic displays shifted, showing star charts that extended far beyond the Federation's borders, marked with tactical positions, defensive installations, and what appeared to be the largest military deployment in galactic history. We've been preparing for this fight for 3 years, Kat continued, building alliances, stockpiling resources, training joint operations teams. All those primitive human patrol routes? They're the foundation of the most comprehensive defensive network ever constructed. She tapped her tablet one final time. The good news is, we're not asking anyone to fight alone. The bad news is, we're all going to fight whether we want to or not. The really bad news is, our enemy doesn't believe in surrender, negotiation, or leaving survivors. Ambassador Kroon's gill slits were fluttering so rapidly they were generating small atmospheric disturbances. And the good news? Kat's smile widened, and for the first time since this whole diplomatic nightmare began, it looked genuinely warm instead of terrifying. The good news, Ambassador, is that they're about to learn why you should never underestimate a species that considers asymmetric warfare and impossible odds to be recreational activities. She gathered her materials and headed toward the exit. Briefing starts in 1 hour. Conference Room Alpha. Bring coffee. It's going to be a long war. The chamber remained silent until the massive doors sealed behind her, and then every delegate began talking at once. Outside, walking toward what was definitely not going to be her last difficult conversation of the day, Commander Kat Wolf allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Humans were officially part of the galactic community now. Time to show the universe what that really meant.